Welcome to Biotech 2026. As the BioCentury This Week podcast kicks off its 7th season, we have some opening thoughts for the year in biotech from editor-in-chief Simone Fishburne and Washington editor Steve Usdin. Along the way, we will talk about how advocates are regrouping after the senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, has blocked pediatric PRV reauthorization, and we'll take a look at the land of the rising sun. Japan biotech is looking to level up. Before we get to all of that, hey, BioCentury is hosting its 5th East-West Summit in Seoul this March. Early bird rates expire on Friday. Come join us in biotech's next up-and-coming region, source innovation from Asia, or accelerate your own pipeline by finding the right Asia partner. And if you want to learn more, look for Josh at JP Morgan next week. We'd be happy to tell you all about it. And if you're planning to wander around the soggy streets of San Francisco next week, look no further than BioCentury's JPM Guide. That's jpmguide.com to help you navigate all of the conferences and receptions and satellite meetings that will be kicking off as early as Saturday. All right, let's cut to the chase. Simone, Steve, Happy New Year. Simone, how are you looking at biotech as we kick off the year? We've done a lot of year-end stuff. You can check out the best of BioCentury. You can check out our analyst picks on biocentury.com. But now we're moving on. We're looking ahead. Simone, where's your head at?
Well, first of all, I want to tell you, Jeff, that my phone reliably informs me that we will not be walking around the rain or soggy streets next week, San Francisco. I've got lots of little sun pictures. And therein lies the story of 2026. So as we got onto this call, I was telling Steve how I was kicking off my letter from the editor with a lot of good news. And he said that is the split screen of 2026, which is the theme we're going with, because there's really reason on the financial front and the biotech funding front for optimism. We've had a good run at the end of 2025. Obviously, we don't know how sustainable it is, but follow-ons are up. The XBI ended up. We even saw, used that word IPO a few times. There's generally a feeling that biotech is sort of coming out of the woods. Stephen Hansen is going to be writing a story saying the bear market is over. We can look at approvals, which were a little down from the year before, FDA drug approvals, but really pretty robust there. If you think that generally the number of approvals per year is a good number. So yeah, there's a lot of positive momentum within biotech. People seem to have shrugged off, absorbed the tariff uncertainty and all the rest of that and shrugged it off. And so the financial gears of biotech are still churning. And now I'm going to throw it to Steve, who's going to give us the other split screen
Well,
kind
first,
of reality.
Don't sleep on innovation. I mean, everybody we talked to, we had Stelios on. They talk about how the science has never been better, the innovation's never been better. So I did want to make a pitch for what's happening in the labs before Dr. Gloom and Doom joins us. Steve's not all that bad. He might be a little more chipper. He's just back from Argentina. Maybe he's seen the light. Steve,
I don't know about the light. Look, the thing is, we're kind of going into an experiment, right? So the thesis for biotech and for the life sciences for the last couple of decades has been that the United States had a competitive advantage because it had the most stable, progressive, science-based regulatory system in the world, because it invested generously in basic research that really created the engine, and that basic research then was translated into biotech companies that generated innovations that then were commercialized by either bigger biotech companies or pharma companies. We're going to be seeing a lot of enthusiasm around the finances in 2026. And as Simone said, a split screen, because there's also a lot of concern about some of these fundamental pillars of the industry. Let's start with FDA. There's tremendous uncertainty about what FDA is going to be doing going forward. The Center for Drug Evaluation and Research now is being directed by Tracy Beth Hoag, who has no regulatory experience, no qualifications for the job, other than political fealty to Marty Makary, the FDA commissioner, and the vision of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the HHS secretary. There's likely to be a great deal of uncertainty, as I said, at FDA. There's also a sense that the commissioner's national priority voucher program is going to create different kinds of flows at FDA. It's going to make it more unpredictable of what's going to get approved and in what speed. It's coming on top of a situation where there's large numbers of FDA staff who have left the agency over the last few months, making it much more difficult for the agency to do its routine work. It's going to be prioritizing work around these priority vouchers, and it's unclear what that's going to mean for other kinds of activities. Then shifting over to NIH, which has really been the kind of the nursery for innovation in the United States. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty at NIH.
Steve, I know there was recent news from NIH. Tell us about the latest thing in terms of one of the directors of one of the institutes at NINDS, right?
Yeah, that's right. So it's actually quite extraordinary. On December 30th, Jay Bhattacharya, the director of NIH, sent out a memo announcing that Dr. Walter Koroshetz will be concluding his service as director of the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. His last day is going to be January 24th. The extraordinary thing about it is that Bhattacharya wrote in the memo that he supported Dr. Koroshetz. He wanted Koroshetz to stay. And he said that Koroshetz's performance as director has been exceptional. However, the Department of Health and Human Services has elected to pursue a leadership transition. That's actually, if you think about it, basically what Bhattacharya is saying is that he's not running NIH. Kennedy.
I have a couple of questions about this one. I mean, yeah, it's extraordinary on two fronts. One is that's really like saying I'm not making the decisions here, right? I think we heard that very early on in his tenure when he joined and had been a lot of people laid off, and he said, well, I wasn't behind all of that, but he wasn't really, he hadn't been there very long. Now he's been there, I can't remember, Steve, at least 6 months, maybe 9. I forget exactly when he took the role. So that's extraordinary. And the other thing is that it is really saying in black and white that this is a political decision. And I have now one follow-up question for you, because I know in one of the pieces, end of year pieces, you projected about FDA and how long RFK Jr. might stay in his role at HHS. Do you think that this augurs badly for Dr. Bhattacharya or not necessarily?
It's hard to predict what's going to happen with Bhattacharya, but my sense of it is that Kennedy is probably going to be out by this time next year. I think he's not going to last much longer than the midterms. And all of the public health leadership that's closely associated with him is likely to follow. And some of them may leave before he does. But there's a tremendous amount of damage that has been done and that will be done over the course of the next year. So I'm not sure that that's really something to be sanguine about at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that Jay Bhattacharya is an acolyte. He was from Stanford. He is part of the group that had a narrative around government's actions with COVID and suppression of voices and so on. And I think he entered NIH claiming that he was going to foster open communication and people shouldn't be scared of what they wanted to say. We know that that's not actually really borne out, but I'm talking about something different here. It really seems that there's now daylight between him and the administration on this. And so I don't really know how to read that. Does that just mean that he's going to continue to roll over and do what the administration, or at least the head of HHS wants? Or will he at some point say, this isn't for me?
No, absolutely. He's given no evidence that he's going to stick up for science or for the scientists at NIH. I don't think that this is the last director who's going to be terminated, regardless of what Bhattacharya says. And I think that it's deeply concerning. Look, this is the 6th largest institute at NIH. It does extraordinarily important work, and it's going to be turned over. We don't know who, but you can bet it's going to be somebody who believes in Kennedy's philosophy and is going to be, subservient to Kennedy. The Eye Institute director may be the next one to go, and so on down the line. This is part of an upheaval that's going to take a very, very long time to correct, if it's possible ever to correct it. And it's not just
okay. A
losing...
quick question though, Steve. I just want to jump in. You've mentioned a couple of other folks, but going back to the head of NINDS, can you just outline if there were specific things you can point to that are counter to the philosophy of this HHS?
I don't know, and the people I've spoken with at NIH don't know either. It's really baffling. He's a highly respected scientist. He played, as Bhattacharya noted in his memo announcing his departure, Koroshet's played a leading role in the NIH Brain Initiative, guiding high-risk, high-reward research that's expanded our ability to map brain cells and circuits, link neural activity to behavior, and lay the groundwork for more precise interventions across neurological and psychiatric diseases. He was involved in partnerships that cut across NIH. I think this is just part of an anti-science agenda emanating from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I don't know that there's any particular thing that Dr. Koroshet did or represented that led to his being forced to leave.
Okay, Steve, you had a story last week about what's happening with the pediatric vouchers, priority review vouchers. This has been going on for some time now. Can you bring us up to speed on what the latest is?
So this is priority review vouchers for companies that develop drugs for rare pediatric conditions. There's broad bipartisan support. There's broad support among patient advocates, among the tiny biotech companies that rely on PRVs to bring therapies for rare cancers, for rare neurological conditions and other conditions forward. And there have been an extraordinary lobbying campaign or advocacy campaign that brought Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals, everyone across the board in Congress together to want to reauthorize the PRV program. On the last day of the Senate session this year, there was an attempt to pass it. It needed universal consent, and Senator Sanders, Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, opposed it. He blocked it. He said that he was blocking it because he wanted the Senate to vote in favor of some unrelated healthcare provisions. He knew when he stood up and did that there was no chance that the Senate was going to do that. The things that he's asked for would cost billions of dollars. They haven't been debated and they haven't gone through the normal order that would be needed to consider some of those things. And even in the unlikely event that the Senate had agreed to his demands, it wouldn't get through the House. So he wasn't negotiating. He was basically vetoing the reauthorization of priority review vouchers. Individual patients who I've spoken with and patient families are devastated by it, but they're going to move forward. There's an attempt now to get the PRV legislation attached to a continuing resolution that Congress has to pass before the end of January in order to prevent a government shutdown, or if there is a government shutdown, there'll be an attempt to attach that to whatever legislation is passed to reopen the government.
All right. Thanks for that, Steve. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back.
BioCentury This Week is brought to you by the 5th East-West Biopharma Summit in South Korea. An arc of innovation is emerging across Asia, and Western biopharma leaders are taking note, from cross-border deals to new co's. In March 2026, the 5th BioCentury Bay Helix East-West Biopharma Summit visits South Korea for the first time. Meet the biopharma leaders putting Korea innovation on the global map. Learn why Korea has become a clinical trial and manufacturing hub. Discover if Korea is the next hotspot for new co-formation. Plus meet biopharma innovators from India to Singapore to China and Japan. Register now at biocenturyeastwest.com.
We are back on the BioCentury This Week podcast, and just another reminder that the early bird deadline for East West ends this Friday, January 9th. So reach out to us. We'd love to tell you more about the conference. Simone, we talked a lot about what's going on in the US. Take us a step beyond that.
Right. Well, thanks, Jeff. I mean, really, everybody needs to be thinking more globally than the US right now. And there are many reasons for that. First of all, I think that no conversation in biotech is complete without talking about China. BioCentury has been talking about China for a long while now. Frankly, I would be delighted if I could go the entire 2026 without somebody telling me that the quality of the data from China isn't really that good. It's nonsense, and that they don't really do innovation. That's nonsense. It's nonsense. It ignores the very reality that China biotech is becoming more and more innovative and sophisticated. This is partly because they are investing, as we are not in the US, in their life sciences sector. Having talked about investing in the life sciences sector, you can see other parts of the world really seeing that as an area to grow. The UK, Europe, we'll talk a little bit about Europe. And now, as BioCentury's conferences reflect, South Korea is quite often mentioned as another place for early clinical trials. Australia long has been one. And this idea of getting early clinical data fast is becoming more and more important in biotech. And the US is not really putting itself as the destination to enable that. So we saw this in our survey, many people saying, actually, we are handling FDA risk by taking our clinical trials overseas. I also want to talk a little bit about innovation, but here is where I'm going to throw to you, Jeff, because what we see is several other areas of the world that have been sort of dormant for a while, that have not really seen. I mean, China was like this to some degree. No one really saw it as a threat until it was, or an opportunity, if you prefer. And so you've done a recent large piece that I want you to talk about in Japan, which I think everybody knows has a sort of Japan pharma, very strong foothold, but nobody has really, they've never really managed to foster a biotech ecosystem. But you seem to find that that's changing, right? Jeff, tell us about that.
Yeah, Simone, thanks for that. Japan has long been a source of innovation in biopharma. Behind the US, it's the number 2 country of origin for blockbuster drugs after the US. But unlike the US, all those blockbusters have come from Japanese pharma, as you kind of alluded to there, and not the biotech. Talked to a lot of VCs from Japan and the US, including Ken Horn of On Venture Partners, Robert Weisskopf of F Prime Capital. Both have been going to Japan for a very long time. And what they've been saying is that they just have felt like the science is spectacular, but there's sort of been this missed opportunity. And part of that is because everyone sort of, I think, knows there's sort of Japan's reputation is a bit risk off. There's the sort of the stereotype of the salary man. You join one company for life. It's kind of the antithesis of that biotech entrepreneurial spirit. And yet, all along, there's been this great science coming out of Kyoto, out of Tokyo, out of Osaka, the universities there. And they sort of go into these, or they have been going into these biotechs that aren't necessarily set up to fail, but they're not set up to succeed. They're undercapitalized. They're led by academics, and they've sort of lacked the know-how, the management know-how, the VC leadership to get the innovation into proper-sized biotechs.
Yeah, Jeff, I think most people know that Japan's behind the seminal PD-1s and many of the other big breakthroughs. But I think we also know from things like Nobel Prize that, you know, on the technology front, they've in fact been pioneering areas like stem cells and that kind of research. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can just talk about, I think what's really, we've had the academics, we've got the sort of know-how from the farmers. Obviously, what's been lacking is capital, right? Mm-hmm. And so VC. So just maybe briefly just talk about, do you have sort of numbers of the way that picture is changing in terms of Japan being seen as an investment opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of numbers, we're starting to see some really large funds. On Venture Partners has just raised the largest Japan dedicated fund. You have longtime players such as University of Tokyo, Edge Capital Partners, which launched in 2004, $1 billion in assets under management, just raised a $326 million sixth fund. And this is coupled by a lot of capital support from the Japanese government. They have a 2-for-1 matching program for programs backed by accredited VCs. And I think the last point I want to make, the one thing that I found really interesting is that sort of the new strategies that are taking place there. One, you have some companies like Fast Track Initiative and Remiges Ventures. Both are building companies based on IP from Japanese academia. Remiges is deploying sort of an incubator model that it launched 5 years ago, where the firm's R Discovery unit kind of handles the nuts and bolts that generally trip up young biotechs, brings each project forth until the point at which they can attract capital and sort of leave the nest. And then you have F Prime, you have On Ventures, among others, who are starting to build companies that marry venture money and management chops from the US with Japanese innovation, and are building these companies that are, right from the get-go, global cross-border companies that have one foot in Japan, one foot in the US, leveraging the inexpensive R&D capabilities and talent and innovation out of Japan with C-suites from the US.
I think it's super interesting, especially when you hear things like F Prime, a lot of the Western investors going in there. I'm going to come back to Europe, bring the conversation back to Europe in a minute. But I want to make this point because it's really important to BioCentury. And it's one of the reasons why we were in China very early, really seeing the opportunity there, because we do believe that this is a global business and biotech is a global business. So we do hold our conferences in these different regions of the world so that we can shine a light on that. I think the South Korea, the conference in Seoul, the East West, which is in March, is going to be super interesting. It does aggregate or congregate, I should actually say, innovators and investors from other regions, but it also shines a spotlight on that. And bringing it back to Europe, this year we're actually in Prague. Who doesn't want to go to lovely Prague? For bioequity in May. But I feel that obviously I talk a lot about the UK, and I know the UK as a nation financially has a lot of problems right now, but everything that I listen to and read talks about investment in the life sciences sector. And Steve, I think you were earlier talking about the European Union making a play now, recognizing the opportunity as the US makes it hard to do innovation, at least from a public investment point of view. And, Europe seems to be seeing that opportunity in terms of both investment and attracting talent. Did you have any thoughts to contribute there?
Well, sure. I think obviously people in leadership positions in Europe are looking at what's happening with regulatory agencies in the United States and with science funding and seeing if there are ways that they can capitalize on it. There are high-profile scientists who are leaving the United States for positions in Europe. EMA leadership has invited CEOs of pharma companies for a meeting with Emer Cook, the head of EMA, and with the EMA's chief medical officer in April. I think that this is going to be part of a larger effort for Europe to make a play for companies to invest in innovation in Europe. I'm going to be talking on the podcast next week about the BioSecure Act, but I think that there are ways that that's going to, again, it's going to create or could create competitive advantages for companies that are in Europe that aren't necessarily subject to some of the restrictions in dealing with China that U.S. companies are feeling.
Well, thanks for that, Steve, Simone. Let's hope it's an exciting year for biotech. I am confident we'll see a lot of great innovation and a lot of stories to watch in Europe, in Asia, and obviously the US as well. You can read some of BioCentury's year-end coverage, our analysts' picks and predictions, the best of BioCentury, Legends Lost, looking at the scientists, entrepreneurs, and investors who left their mark on the biotech industry. Coming up soon, we'll have our annual look at the catalysts we are looking for in the coming year, as well as Stephen Hansen's 2026 Public Markets Preview. Thank you for listening. If you like what you're hearing, like, subscribe, tell your friends about us, send us a question. Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for BioCentury This Week. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.